So, it finally happened. Someone sat directly across from Benjamin Netanyahu and said something that, whether you agree or disagree, reflects a conversation that's becoming harder to ignore, especially across parts of Europe and increasingly in the United States. Now, this clip isn't very long, but sometimes a few minutes tell you more than an hour of speeches. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. What stood out to me here wasn't just the disagreement. World leaders get challenged all the time. It was the fact that the conversation quickly moved beyond politics and into something bigger: public opinion. The interviewer raises a question a lot of people have been debating lately. Has international opinion shifted more than leaders expected? Take a look at this exchange. I'll jump in where needed, and then at the end we'll break down what this moment could actually mean.
Prime Minister, that is one way of viewing the world, and I have some sympathy with some of what you've said. Let me give you another way, which is that many people around the world see the state of Israel as a country that is exclusively using military force, that has killed 70,000 people in Gaza, that is doing nothing to create a sustainable future for people there. That is a country, you've been accused of being a war criminal. If you went to go to several countries in Europe, you're going to get arrested. This is not just mad campus radicalism. This is a feeling around the world. You said it yourself to us just now. In public opinion around the world, Israel is doing very poorly. And it's doing very poorly because people see a country that is behaving in a way that is not compatible with being a liberal democracy. And therefore, I think you have a problem. I think that loss of public opinion, what struck me from your autobiography was how subtly and for how long you have understood this. You know that political power comes from public opinion, and you know that you need to win the battle of public opinion, and you're losing it. You've absolutely lost it in Europe, but much more worryingly for you, you're losing it in America. And I think that what you've just told me about fanaticism is true in part, but it is not going to shape public opinion. People are going to roll their eyes and say, he's saying that anybody who says anything critical about Israel is anti-Semitic. He's giving this large, this story about fanaticism, and he's not accepting the fact that Israel is behaving in a way that we think is incompatible with the kind of liberal democracy.
And this is where the conversation starts getting uncomfortable for a lot of people. Because the argument being made here isn't really about military strength. It's about public opinion. And whether fair or unfair, that's becoming a much bigger part of the discussion. The point being raised is that internationally, and especially inside the United States, attitudes appear far more divided than they were before. You're seeing more public debate, more criticism, and more people openly questioning policies that, for a long time, weren't being challenged in the mainstream to the same degree. And that shift isn't just happening through traditional media anymore. It's happening online. It's happening in political commentary. It's happening in conversations about lobbying, campaign funding, foreign policy, and what influence should look like in democratic societies. People are paying closer attention to who supports what, who receives backing from where, and how those relationships shape political decisions. Now, whether that actually translates into long-term political change is a completely different question. But one thing is clear. This isn't a conversation that's staying on the sidelines anymore. The debate has become louder, more public, and much harder for political leaders to ignore.
Israel.
Liberal democracies that fought the battles from World War II.
Now, before we go any further, I want you to pay attention to something that's easy to miss if you're only listening to the words. Don't just watch Netanyahu here. Watch the people sitting across from him. Look at the expressions on the faces of the hosts. Watch the reactions. Watch the moments where they don't interrupt immediately. Watch the pauses. Because sometimes interviews tell two stories at the same time, one through the answers, and another through the room itself. And this is where things start getting interesting. As the conversation continues, you can see an effort to reframe the discussion away from criticism of Israeli policy and toward a much broader argument about security, extremism, and global threats. Now, that approach isn't unusual in political interviews. Leaders everywhere do this. When pressure increases, the conversation often shifts from defending specific actions to defending the larger principle behind them. But what stood out here was the contrast. You've got a question being framed around international perception, public opinion, and concern over conduct. And then you've got an answer that moves the conversation toward a wider battle over values, security, and who gets to define the conflict. Again, whether you agree or disagree with that approach isn't even the point right now. What's interesting is watching the people in the room process it in real time. Because there's this feeling that the discussion starts moving from direct accountability into narrative control. And that's why I'm saying, don't just listen. Watch the body language. Watch the expressions. Because sometimes the most revealing part of an interview isn't the statement itself. It's the reaction after it's made.
To Afghanistan, to Iraq, and so on, the ratio of combatants to non-combatants killed was 6-1, 7-1. In Gaza, because Hamas was forcing people to stay in urban areas at gunpoint, the ratio is about 1.5-1. And we lost a lot of soldiers because we didn't carpet bomb.
That is disputed, Prime Minister.
We didn't do.
People have different ratios as well, including.
I'm telling you, you don't actually, but that's not the point. It certainly wasn't 6-1 or 7-1, and we certainly didn't carpet bomb, which we could have done right away. We've lost a lot of people by my refusal and the IDF's own mores in making sure that doesn't happen. Now, if you have the densest urban warfare theater in history, with 500 kilometers of terror tunnels underneath, 50 meters below, 50 meters above, everything booby-trapped, and you don't come in and just bomb the place to smithereens, which we didn't. I mean, we had everything booby-trapped. We moved the population out, and then you have to fight the Hamas in there. The ratios in Mosul, the ratios in Fallujah, the ratios elsewhere, there's nothing comparison, and that was nothing compared to what our brave soldiers had to face in Gaza. So I dispute the fact. The argument that you put forward is being put forward. It doesn't make it true. What is true is that Israel is fighting these worst killers, these people who took not only beheaded our men, raped our women, and then murdered them, burned our babies alive, and took 255 hostages, which we took out. Nobody believed that we got them out. These are barbarians, and they're given a free look. I have demonstrations on behalf of Hamas. Notice that they're burning the flag of Israel.
And this right here is the moment to pay attention to. Because watch what happens next. Instead of staying narrowly focused on the criticism being raised, the conversation starts shifting toward a much bigger argument, not just about policy, but about perception, security, values, and how different countries interpret what's happening. And this is something you see constantly in modern politics. When leaders come under pressure, the response often isn't only to defend specific actions, it's also to reframe the entire conversation. So watch closely here. Notice how the discussion begins moving away from the original criticism and toward a broader message about alliances, public opinion, and what's at stake beyond the conflict itself. Supporters will see this as explaining context and pushing back against what they view as unfair narratives. Critics will see it as redirecting the conversation and trying to regain control of public perception. Either way, this is the part where the interview stops being just an interview and turns into a battle over who gets to define the story.
And the flag of the UK, the flag of Israel and the flag of America. When you have pro-Israel demonstrations, they wave Israeli flags, they wave American flags, they wave British flags. These people are against you, whether you recognize it or not. They will sweep away your societies, your freedoms, your ideas, the values that we cherish, exactly
Prime
as you
Minister,
do.
it really isn't just extreme radicals. There are huge numbers of people who are concerned about Israel's behavior. Frankly, including people like me.
Well, you
Friends
know,
of Israel who
I
are
think that if
concerned.
Britain was invaded, forgive me, you know, if Britain was invaded and you had the equivalent in Britain, your population is what, 65 million, something like that, 60 million, right? So you're about 6 times our size. So if you had on one day about 8,000 Brits murdered, mutilated, raped, and kidnapped, and they came right next to London, what would you do? We know what you did. We know exactly what Britain did, and I don't hold Churchill or the British government or the British people who supported him responsible for saying you shouldn't act that way. You bombed the living daylights out of German cities and out of French cities that were in your way and so on. We didn't do that.
And after watching that entire exchange, you can see why reactions to Netanyahu and the Israeli government have become so intense internationally. What stood out to me wasn't even that there was disagreement. Political leaders are challenged all the time. It was that this interviewer was willing to say directly and publicly something that a lot of critics have been arguing for months now, that international opinion has shifted and that public support in some places doesn't look the way it used to. Now, to be clear, There are ongoing legal and political disputes surrounding the conflict, and there are serious allegations that continue to be debated and argued internationally. Supporters of Israel argue their actions are driven by security concerns and the realities of fighting armed groups. Critics argue there must be greater accountability and that humanitarian consequences cannot be ignored. But regardless of where people land politically, one thing feels difficult to deny. This conversation is no longer staying inside government rooms or policy circles. People are paying attention. Questions about public opinion, civilian suffering, media access, international pressure, and political accountability have become part of the mainstream conversation in a way that would have been hard to imagine a few years ago. And that's why moments like this get attention. Not because everyone suddenly agrees, but because someone said out loud what many viewers believe isn't being discussed enough. Anyway, let me know what you think about this exchange. Do you think this was fair questioning, or do you think the criticism misses the bigger picture? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy this kind of political commentary and breakdown content, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.